Hi everybody and welcome to week 5. So this is just a check-in to remind everyone that if you haven't been participating in the Facebook group, please do. It's worth 10% of your mark and it's a really easy way to boost your overall grade in the course. So one thing I just wanted to mention was if you're using a different name on Facebook than what's in Blackboard, please make sure that you send me an email with what your name is in Blackboard just to make sure that your participation mark is accurately attributed to you. So if you haven't done that, please do. And again, just remember we have 3 more weeks left in the course, so lots of opportunities to boost those participation marks if you aren't already. Okay, so now that we're in week 5, we're going to be talking about reporting and analytics. And one thing that I want to stress about this course is that reporting and analytics are different for everyone. So if you work for a large agency, your reporting is going to look a lot different than someone who works at a not-for-profit. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're measuring the metrics that you need and that meet your goals, there's really no right or wrong way to do it in terms of your formatting. So there's lots of things that you can find online to download, templates, and there's lots of numbers that you can look at. But what you're going to see throughout this lecture is that it really is about what your organization or your brand needs. So if you're somebody who's already working in social media and you're already doing reporting for your company or for yourself, I'd love for you to share in the Facebook group, how that's being done at a high level so that we can learn from each other if you're able to share that. And as I mentioned last week, I don't typically go for the paid services, so I stick to Facebook and Twitter insights that are native in the app, and you can do that on Instagram as well. But if you're using something different, I would love to hear what it is. So this week we're going to walk through the key things you want to consider reporting on to showcase the work that you're doing. They're not only good to know, how you're doing, but also figuring out if things are successful in the way that you want them to be. And so a good way to show measurable success when talking to your boss or to your client is being able to demonstrate that the work you're doing is moving you towards a goal. And part of why we do this kind of reporting is because, as you'll see, it's not really enough to just say, like, our Facebook page grew by 1,000 likes in the last month. That doesn't really tell you a lot. And often those kind of surface level metrics are what people look at, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. I think also it's important to remember that nobody is perfect and everything is always capable of improvement. I like to think of it as being in like beta testing constantly. And that means that when you're reporting, it gives you the opportunity to improve and you can kind of see what you're doing right and you can move more in that direction, or you can see when things aren't working so that you don't waste your time. I just want to note that at the end of this lecture, I'm going to be talking about the part 2 of your major assignment. So by now, you should have all submitted the first part of your final assignment. The second part is a fairly in-depth piece of work. It's worth 40% of your mark. So I'm making my way through marking part 1 of your assignment, and you will have your grades and feedback by the end of this week so that you can continue working. So since we're talking about analytics and reporting, I just want to sort of frame it for you as a pretty common experience that you're going to find when you start working in it. So as a community manager, your focus is to build relationship and loyalties. So think of yourself as the first line of defense a lot of the time when people come to your brand or your organization for customer service. So because of that, it's important to know how these interactions and engagements you're having with your community are going. Generally, when you talk to a client or your boss about analytics, you're going to get one of 2 responses. One, they're super stoked and want to know every possible number that you can give them, even if they don't really understand it. They just want you to keep digging deeper and finding out everything you can. They're probably the kind of people who have heard the term social listening and are obsessed with it and want you to do that. But the more common thing that you're going to encounter is someone who thinks that numbers are scary, and as long as what you're doing is working, they don't want to hear about it. So I think a thing that can be difficult is reconciling the fact that often your boss or your superiors are like, I don't really want to hear about the numbers, I don't care, it seems like it's working. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't care. If anything, like, you need to care a lot, but not so much that you're obsessed with analytics. I like to think of it as kind of finding a middle ground where you're regularly reporting on what you're doing, you're getting insights, and then you're pivoting as you need to. So caring about the things that matter to you, and also, being able to interpret those in a way that's useful for you. So when you're trying to find this happy medium between these two feelings about analytics, try to make sure you're not getting too tied down by the numbers, because you've still got to be working on engaging people with your brand or your organization. But if you totally disregard the numbers, you're sort of going to lose that ability to have an indication about what you're doing right and what isn't going so well. And knowing that is so helpful to doing your job, not only because it saves you time because you're not investing in things that aren't working with your audience, but it just also helps you with your strategy because it's like you can see this is working, so let's just keep doing this thing that's working. So for me, a happy medium in this has always been reporting on my metrics monthly, and maybe more often if I'm doing a specific campaign. And of course, like I also do a year over year. But even seeing how the numbers change month over month can help you then go back into your posts and see what performed well on a more granular level. And then you can try and make more of that kind of content. So when you see months where things didn't perform so well, it helps you get, a sense of what you can do to improve that content to get it, up to where you want it to be in the next month. So whether that's tweaking your copy or your creative or your posting time, you have that ability to check in month over month. And so I think it is really about what works for your organization. A lot of places do quarterly, they do every 6 months, they do monthly, some people do weekly, which I think is way too much. But again, it depends on like the kind of brand or client that you have. So in this lecture, we're going to talk about the importance of metrics and how you report back to your team and how you keep yourself from getting bogged down in the numbers. So if you haven't noticed yet, a theme in this course is goals. So whether it's your brand goals, your goals for your content, your goals for your campaign, it's also really important to have goals for your metrics. So you can't understand what you're reporting on if you don't know what your end goal is. So knowing that you have a lot of likes on a post is great, but it's not great if it's not one of your goals. Similarly, if you have a type of content, maybe you are really trying to push videos and nobody's watching your videos. That's, a thing that you want to kind of gear everything towards so that when you're reporting on it, you can kind of see like how it's performing versus other things, and just try to figure out like what you can do based on your audience's performance to really move things towards that goal. And again, just this idea of like, you're only one person, you sort of have to use your time wisely. And so reporting on hundreds of different metrics isn't helpful if you're not digging deep into the ones that matter the most to you. So for a community manager, it isn't enough to be able to answer how many likes do you have on your page, how many retweets did you get. We need to be able to answer, but what do these numbers do? So what I mean by that is we're looking at conversions. And I think this idea of a conversion often gets people scared because they think of it as something that inherently means somebody's buying something or that it has, an inherent monetary value. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, yeah, but I run an account for a charity, so what does that mean in terms of a conversion? Or, I'm running one for my own personal brand online. How do I measure conversions? So again, conversions aren't necessarily a monetary thing. Conversions are what's important to your company. So again, think of conversions as a goal. Maybe your goal is to get more email news subscribers. Maybe you want to get people to buy something. If you're a not-for-profit, maybe you want a donation. If you're a professional association, maybe you want people to get a membership. So what I've listed are a couple of things that could be seen as a measurement of your ROI, which is your return on your investment, for the work you're doing as a community manager. So that can be things like making a sale of a product or some kind of transaction if you sell a service, making a donation. It could be getting people to subscribe to your website. So for example, if you're a news outlet, it could be an email transaction, so getting someone to sign up for your newsletter. It could just be increasing your traffic or your visitors. So maybe you have a specific page on your website that you're trying to get more eyeballs on. It could be just having people have discussions on your blog posts and you want different kinds of sentiments or a certain amount of comments. Could be getting people to sign up for a membership. Or it could just be sort of overall improving the way that your page is performing so that you can then get people buying ad revenue, or on the other hand, just getting people to click on ads that you have out there. So if you don't know what your goal is, stop the video and think about it. Because if you don't know what your goal is, then how are you supposed to measure how it's performing? And I think we talked in one of our earlier lectures that, we need to have brand goals. So think of this in the same way. You can't do anything until you know what your goal is. And so depending on what your role is within your company, you might actually be supporting someone who's doing analytics, or you might be the person who's running your Google Analytics and running your social media and sort of checking to make sure all of your newsletters have good open rates, all of that. So this question of how do I support versus how do I know if it's working are two things that you should sort of always keep in mind. So I'm going to talk a little bit about teams, but you can also think of this as parts of your overall marketing campaign. So just sort of think of it as things working together. So in order to know how you're doing, you need to work across teams. And even if you're a team of one, which is what I've been for almost my entire career, I like to think of it as working across all of the things that I do and kind of consolidating every aspect of my job and then telling a story with it. How did our newsletter drive traffic to the website? How did our Facebook lead to more newsletter signups? Whatever your goals may be. But you may also work in an actual team. And so you may be the person who just does the social media, and you have someone who looks at your analytics for the website and for your social, and you're maybe reporting to them. So that's that supporting role. How do you help them tell their story? And similarly, if you're the person doing analytics, you may need to talk to other parts of your team. So your sales team can tell you how many conversions happen from social, or your web team can tell you how much traffic social is driving. You've got to work together to paint this complete picture. And sort of knowing how everything is performing is the only way to optimize your content and your time. So you want to keep doing things that are working, and you can only do that by painting a full picture. So let's look at the numbers. You should always be trying and testing new things, and the only way that you can have a good sense of what needs to be changed is by working with other members of your team to help understand how you can improve your content and improve what you're doing. So it isn't just about social, really. I think we've talked a couple of times throughout this course about the idea that all of your marketing and communications things need to work together. So this idea of not siloing things. And again, you want to make sure that your social understands what your web team goals are, understands what your sales goals are, so that you can kind of move together towards that common goal. So one of the ways to do that is making sure that you have these kinds of check-ins built into your monthly analytics reporting and just built into your general strategy and plan. So like I said, when you think about it, always take an in beta approach, meaning that you can and are always changing things that don't work to try and deliver the best possible experience and content that you can for your community. And I think especially as pages and algorithms change, you want to be at the forefront of those things so that you're adapting and relevant. So we don't go a lot into SEO in this course, but a lot of times things in Google change, and your web team probably knows that. And if your web team knows that, you need to know that so that you can be pushing people to the right pages. And so what I've done is I've listed out sort of 4 things that I think are really important. So one, working with your web and IT team. They're the kind of people who are making sure that your Google Analytics are working. They're able to tell you where traffic is going, how long people are staying on the pages, all of that. Also working with your sales and larger marketing team. So again, if you have a sales team that's pushing a specific product, you need to know that as the community manager. Next, use your tools. So use the plan that you've made, use everything that we talked about last week that's kind of at your disposal to make good content that's relevant for your community, and again, adjust and improve. So if one month you see that something's not performing really well, try and tweak the content, try and tweak the image or the posting time, and if that doesn't work, then try changing it again next month. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Let's talk about some of the tools that we have at our disposal. So if you've never worked with Google Analytics before, you're probably wondering how it's possible to know how someone clicked on your tweet and ended up buying a product and how we could possibly track that. So enter two things, Google Analytics and cookies. So these are super, super powerful, and you may not be the person running your Google Analytics, but just understanding how it works is really, really important. So it can give you amazing insights, and the kinds of things that you can see are like where people are from who visit your site, how long they stay on which pages. You can see where they've clicked through to, how many pages they've looked at, for how long. You can see if they've added something to their cart. You can see if they've kind of, shared something, or if they have stayed on a page for a really long time, if they've come back to that page multiple times, if they've gone to your homepage and then just left immediately. It can tell you so much about how users are interacting with your website. It's amazing. So for most businesses, driving traffic to a website is an important goal. And whether you offer a service or a product, or you want to raise information, people need to find your social compelling enough that they go to your website, and once they're there, you want them to stay. And you want them to stay because this is this idea of building people who are loyal to your brand. So if they go to your website and they like it and they see things that they find interesting and useful, they're going to come back, or they're going to spend enough time on it that they're going to absorb that content that you're spending so much time creating. And Google Analytics is pretty easy to wrap your head around once you do a bit of work on it. So last week I put the Google Analytics Academy in the lecture notes. So if you didn't see that, I'm going to share it again in the Facebook group, because it's a really great free resource to understand just how it works and maybe how you could be using it for your own website. If you have a web team, it's probably already set up, or they can help you make sure that everything's tracking properly, because one of the things that Google Analytics can do is it can track a campaign. So if you're a charity, for example, say you have a specific campaign that you're trying to run, you can actually add an analytics tag to every URL that you're putting out for it, so that you can track everything related to that campaign. So it's pretty cool. And yeah, if you have some time this week, definitely look at Google Analytics Academy. It's so great. But like everything in analytics, it's really easy to find yourself lost in the weeds. So I just want to reiterate why it's important to know what you're looking for and what's important to your company. Because otherwise you're going to spend so much time getting lost in Google Analytics. So like if it's not important for you to have only visitors from Canada, then like don't spend a lot of time looking at that. So the other important thing are cookies, and I would love to do a lecture on the virtues of like the best flavor of cookie. What I'm actually referring to are these little snippets of data that are sent from a website, and then they're stored on a user's web browser. So if you've ever found yourself Googling something, maybe you're looking for a new pair of jeans, and then suddenly you're served an ad on Facebook for the same jeans that you were just looking at, that's done by cookies. And what those do is it sort of tracks what you're looking at on the web, and then it serves you ads, or it remembers you when you go back to a website. If you've ever added something to your cart when you're online shopping, and then you come back and it remembers you or what's in your cart, those are all things done with cookies. So this can be really powerful if you are trying to sell things. One of the things that you'll find in Google Analytics is your bounce rate. And to me, this is actually one of the most important things that you can look at with analytics. And so unlike other things in reporting, you do not want a high number for your bounce rate. So to put it simply, a bounce rate is the percentage of visitors to a particular page on your website who navigate away from that page, either they go to a home page and they leave right away, or they go to your homepage and they only go to one page. Just looking at this idea of when people get to your website, when do they bounce? So here in this example, you can see that nearly 41% of people visiting this website leave after getting to only one page. And so you can do a lot with bounce rates, and part of it is looking at just how a user kind of makes their way through your website. So if they are getting to your homepage and leaving right away, it means there's something on your homepage that's not compelling enough for them. But similarly, if they are getting to your blog and then they're bouncing, maybe it's because they're not finding content that they find relevant. If they're getting to your product page, maybe they don't like your products. It just gives you an idea of like what you're doing right and wrong. And it especially helps when you're doing an overall look at your website to see where people are going and where they're staying the longest. Because this is the idea that somebody goes to your page, the longer they're there, the more likely they are to buy something, the more likely they are to subscribe to a newsletter. So if someone goes to your blog and they're on your blog for 30 minutes, they're the exact kind of person that you want signing up for your newsletter so that they get that content in their news digest every day. And so bounce rate is it's so interesting and so helpful. So it's one that I really wanted to point out because it actually ties a lot to this idea of brand loyalty that we've talked about throughout the course. So since we're talking about content and we're talking about reporting, I thought we should actually talk a little bit about your blog, which is an important part of your website if you have one. So I find blogs are an extremely contentious issue in the world of marketing. People either love them and think they're super helpful, or they think that they're a waste of time. But I think that blogs can actually be really useful if you do them properly. And I say if you do them properly because, like everything, if you're doing something that doesn't fit with your audience, then why are you doing it? It's just wasting your time and kind of wasting theirs. So I love this quote from Kevin Donahue. He runs a blog called Fan Blogs, which is a football blog. And he says, have a single focus about a topic you really enjoy and put a little bit of yourself into it. And that passion turns into a loyal readership. And so we've talked a couple of times about this idea of brand loyalty and about brand evangelists, and a blog is a perfect way to get people to really represent your brand and to understand what your brand is all about and to be able to take that message in the comments section and on social. And so I think it can really work if you are really putting a lot of effort and thought into it. So one of the things that I've put in your lecture notes this week is this really amazing resource from none other than Moz. And it's this thing called The Beginner's Guide to Social Media. And chapter 11 is about blogging. So if you want to just navigate to chapter 11 or read the whole thing is really great. But it is a really great overview of like how people use blogs, strategies and tactics for success, and just sort of like what success looks like, and some recommended tools. So it's a great overview, and I'll cover a little bit of it. So a good blog should really help you become an authority in the area that you are trying to be in. So a blog isn't necessarily about selling things. If anything, I think selling is like the last thing on a list. A good blog should give you exposure and connection and engagement. It should give people an opportunity to share and link back to you. And think of it as like nourishment or ammo to, give your brand evangelists. And if people love what you're doing and they love your content and they're sharing your content everywhere, they're fueling sales on your behalf. And maybe it's not sales, maybe it's signing up for a course or making a donation. But a blog should really be a tool that you make so that people can do that work for you. And really, at the end of the day, a blog is really great for building expertise and authority. So it's the kind of thing that other people are maybe sharing your content for you. People are referring back to your blog, and that's kind of how you not only move up in the world of whatever you're in, but it's just a great way to really become the person that people can look at when they have questions about wherever you're working in. So to stay on theme for today's lecture, how do you know if your blog is working? So knowing how to measure your success on your blog versus your website on your social is really important. And a lot of times they have different metrics, and you can kind of see that as you move through working in community management, that like sometimes you'll see on your blog certain things do really, really well, or certain pages of your website do really, really well, or certain social posts do really well. And part of your job is figuring out what it is that makes those things perform well and replicating it through all of your other content. So some of the things that are really important when you're measuring success for a blog is looking at, are you getting a lot of comments on your blog? Are they helpful and engaging? Are people responding to each other? Are you responding to them? This idea of referral traffic. So did you write an amazing blog on how to take care of a cactus, and lots of gardening centers or plant bloggers are referring back to your website? Then that's great, because that's, again, building your authority. And that to me is a measure of success, that other people who are maybe in related fields see your content and are like, hey, that's actually really good content. We're going to refer back to that. So again, you can't know anything without measuring it, and you can't measure anything without a goal. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're doing this kind of work, that it's all about measuring your success based on the things that are important to you. So a thing that I just wanted to quickly mention is, this idea of posting a lot of times being successful. And I think this can go for social media, it can go for blogging. Just because you're posting 100 times a day doesn't mean that you're good at community management, and doesn't mean that you're good at content. And I think there's a lot of opinions out there about like the number of times you should be posting every day and the number of blog posts you should be putting out every week. And to me, I think it is really about what makes sense for your brand. And I know I've said this a couple of times throughout the course, but if you don't have a readership that's going to read your blog, then why are you putting 3 out a week? Let alone, why are you putting 1 out? You don't have to have a blog. You don't have to have videos. You don't have to have an email newsletter. But you have to have things that make sense for the people who are coming to your brand and to your website and to your social. And so don't just do things because you think you have to. I think, maybe in the first or second lecture, I talked about, the idea of knowing your audience. So are you going to have a LinkedIn page if you're trying to, get a lot of people who are teenagers? Probably not. And so the same thing goes with your blog and your website and all of those other tools that you're using. Okay, let's get back to social media tracking. So it's important, obviously, that's why we're talking about it today. But every social media tool that you're using right now should have some sort of analytics baked into it. So if it doesn't, consider why you're using it. And I say that like if you're using a video platform, it should have analytics that come with it, so that you can see how things are performing. And if it doesn't, maybe reconsider using it. So last week we talked about some tools, including the channels themselves. So like I said, I use Facebook Insights a lot, Twitter Analytics a lot, YouTube Analytics. But there's also paid social analytics tools like Sprout Social and Sysmos and Hootsuite, Buffer, so many more. And I think when you are making the decision about what you want to use when you're doing reporting and analytics, just think about your time and think about your money. So if you have the time to go into each individual platform and pull analytics, then great. You should use those free tools. If you've got the money and you think that it would be helpful for you to get things like social listening, then maybe a paid tool is for you. It just really depends on the size of your organization, the size of your team. So just keep those things in mind when you're making those decisions. But I think regardless, there are 2 main things that you want to be tracking. So, looking at your likes every month is kind of helpful, but over time you do want to see that sort of stuff, but it's not really the only thing, because somebody liking your page doesn't really tell you anything. And the way that I like to think of it is, until someone takes an action, those are really just vanity statistics. And so that's why I recommend looking at like month over month or quarter over quarter, and including those things, because you do want to see like if your likes are going up. But really what it's about is people who like your page and then are doing something. So there's 2 things, reach and engagement, that I think are the 2 most important things that you want to be looking at when you're doing social media reporting, regardless of the size of your organization and regardless of what your approach is, these are the two things that tell you the most about how your social is performing. So you have post reach, which is the number of people who have been reached by your post. And so that can go up or down based on if you spend some money behind it. But just getting an idea of like who is seeing things is really helpful, and what those numbers are, because sometimes if something only has 2 likes, it's not really telling you that actually maybe 2,000 people saw it. And then you want to look at your engagement rate. And those are the number of people who maybe did one of those like Facebook reacts, who are sharing it or are commenting on it, or who are just like posting that link on their own social. Those two things, reach and engagement, tell you so much. Because what you want for your content is so that people are always engaging with it. And that can be difficult without paying for people to see it, but I think that if you were to do any type of paid posting, trying to do it so that your engagement gets up is really helpful. One of the other things that you're going to want to track is keeping an eye on your competitors. So I like to build right into my schedule, like every 6 months or every 4 months, like looking at my competitors, just to see like how they're doing. If they suddenly have a huge spike in their likes or in their follows, like I want to know that. I want to see that, because then I want to see what they're doing and what we're doing differently. So do you feel like you're tracking enough stuff yet? Because there's a lot of things to track. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what you should be tracking. So I think that when you're doing a report on your analytics, regardless of if you're doing it every month or every quarter, you should highlight your best posts and sample interactions. And I think that having those things can really help you tell your story. So one of the things that I've put in your lecture notes for this week is a Washington Post article. And it's about how 6 out of 10 people who share something on social media actually don't read it. And so this kind of goes into what we've been talking about all along of like, what do these analytics mean? Are they actually useful? And it's just a sort of funny look at the fact that you may be sharing content that's great and people are sharing it because it has a great, headline. But it just sort of speaks to this idea of like why you need to dig down into things. And so when you're putting together your report, including posts like these, so on the left we have Twitter analytics, and on the right we have a Facebook post, just so you can kind of see like what's actually happening. And that's why I also think if you post something and you have some great discussion on the comments or in your blog, like include that too, because that really does tell your story. And again, like I said, some competitor insights as well can be really, really, really helpful. So I just want to briefly talk about tools like HubSpot and Salesforce. So HubSpot is an inbound marketing software that helps companies attract and convert leads and basically like close customers. And HubSpot is this really interesting paid tool for marketers that can help you with all aspects of your social media, like creating content and marketing campaigns. And because it is geared towards marketers, it's really neat. You can do a lot of things with it. On the other hand, you have Salesforce, which is more geared towards helping you create loyal and long-lasting customers. So an interesting thing about these two tools, and part of why I'm mentioning it, is because they're actually integrated together. And the idea is that it allows your team to pass leads between the two of you. So it's pretty great if you want to ensure that your marketing work is integrating with your sales work. And part of why I'm mentioning this is because this is an example of marrying those two things together and stopping the silo. So you don't want your social to be like way out in left field and your sales team to be way out in right field. You want to make sure that they're talking to each other. So an interesting thing that you can do is with HubSpot, say you figure out that a certain Twitter user is a top customer. Think of it as the ability that you could create content for those exact social users who you already know are active on social and who love your product. But then also imagine if you could prove it. Think about like what that would do for your reporting. And with Salesforce, it lets you sort of get all of this information in one place so that like who this Twitter user is, you know what they've bought in the past, you know when the last time they've bought something is. And I like to think of these tools as like a good way to build brand champions and brand evangelists, like we've been talking about. However, these tools are really expensive. So if you work in a small shop, you probably won't be working with these, but you do encounter them in larger companies. Like I've worked with Salesforce a number of times. But just an idea that these kinds of things exist, and like that is one spectrum of community management. The next thing I want to talk about is A/B testing, which isn't just for email newsletters. You can use it for any kind of content that you're creating to see how it's doing. So you can test for Facebook ads, promoted tweets. You can see what captions and headlines and photos people are responding well to. And it's actually a pretty easy process, and I think people get freaked out a lot by it, but it's pretty easy. So brainstorm what you want to test. So maybe you've got a post, but you're not sure what product photo is going to really sell it. So what you would do is you would create post A, and that's what we call the control version. So it's got what you think you want to use as your photo. And so what you do then is you create option B, which is a alternative to your control. So maybe it's the exact same link, it's the exact same copy, it's just a different photo. Then what you're going to do is you're going to put them both out there and you see how they perform. And then what you do is you turn whatever the winner is into your next control. So say you've put both of these out there and people actually like photo B more. Then B becomes the next control. And then you do it all over again. It's super powerful once you start seeing how your wording and your photos all affect your conversions and your calls to action. Because sometimes people aren't drawn to the things that you think they're going to be, and that's a great way to figure out what's best, and it doesn't really cost you anything but your time. Okay, so now that you know that people are clicking on your stuff, is that enough? As I mentioned earlier in the video, somebody liking a page or sharing an article doesn't really give you enough information. So instead of knowing that Susie just clicked the link, what if we knew that Susie clicked the link and then read 4 more pieces on the blog, shared one, and then decided to buy a product that was featured in one of the blogs? Click-through is this thing like bounce rate that I think tells us so much about what people are doing and how they interact with the things that we're that we're putting out there. And in the past, I've worked with companies that what they wanted was they wanted people to click through their website. They wanted people to read their whole blog. They wanted people to read so much about them. But, on the flip side, if you're a product, like you want people to go to your website, you want them to click through and buy a product, and you kind of want to create different pathways for them to get there. So that's another really great thing that you'll find in Google Analytics that you'll want to report on, I think. Okay, so let's talk about analysis and analytic tools. So when we're reporting on social, I think if we wanted to look at it at a very high level of like what your social is doing that's leading back to the website, you're going to want to look at clicks. So like I just was talking about click-throughs, you're going to want to look at your bounce rate, you're going to want to look at the amount of time they're spending on your website, and you want to look at their conversions. So you want to see like, did somebody get to your homepage and then leave immediately? You want to see, did somebody get to your blog and read every single blog post that you have? You want to see, did they get to your how it's made page and they spent 5 minutes learning about how you make your product? And you want to see, did a bunch of people click from Twitter and buy a product, and like what they did once they got onto your website. So I think that's a really great thing to keep in mind. It's a pretty basic measurement, but it's a great way to start. The other thing that you want to measure is your responses, and those are the things that we were talking about with like post reach and engagement. So you want to measure like what people are doing from your social, and then you want to measure what people are doing with your social. So are they liking things? Are they commenting on a blog? Are they telling people to subscribe to your newsletter? Like, what are they doing? Another thing that I kind of wanted to mention in this this lecture, because we are talking a lot about this idea of working in beta, is the idea of integrating surveys and feedback into what you're doing, both on your website and on your social. So I think we often forget that when it's executed well, survey and feedback comments are so incredibly helpful to us as community managers, and they help us create content, they help us create engagement. I think we always think of feedback as like a thing where we're going to get negative comments, and like maybe you are, but honestly, getting negative comments about what you're doing sometimes is so helpful. So I'm a big fan of regularly having surveys and feedback because, like I said, it helps people engage with you and it helps them feel like they're being listened to, which just increases their likelihood for becoming a brand evangelist. So, some things to keep in mind if you do these are remembering that positive or negative feedback is both helpful and good. You're going to want to keep comments for your reports. So, if you run a survey and somebody gives you some great feedback, like you want to share that with your team. You want to think about doing maybe themed polls. You want to ensure that if you do surveys that they're scheduled and that they're consistent. Maybe it's a quarterly survey about something different every time, but just this idea that you regularly do it helps people participate more. You want to leverage your partners. So a thing that I've always run into is that when I do a survey, I'm able to go to my network of partners and say, hey, can you share this? We'd love to get people's feedback. And it really helps get a wider range of responses. The other thing is inviting testimonials. So whether that's having a space for people to write their own comments or clicking if they want to be part of a feedback and focus group, then those are great ways to just get more information from people. And then the last thing is that you want to reward their completion. So however that looks for you, I'm a big advocate of doing that. So we've been talking about this idea of reporting to people and people maybe not understanding what you are actually doing or what the numbers mean. And so I just wanted to briefly look at who you might actually be making reports for and who might be interested in your analytics. So depending on the way your company is structured, you may have a larger marketing or communications team or department that you would want to keep informed. You may have your community members, so that might be blog posts or annual reports where you report on your success. It could be what's known as the C-suite, so those are like CEOs, CTOs, COOs. Think of that as like the senior leadership. Or, if you work in a small business or a tech startup, it could be the founder. You could also report to other stakeholders, so maybe it's your board of directors, your volunteers, your donors. But just have that in mind when you are making your reports, like who's actually looking at these and what kind of information do they want, and are you writing for them? Finally, we've made it to the actual report. So like I said in the first slide, it doesn't look the same for everyone in terms of how you do it, but as a best practice, including these things will be really helpful for you. So one of the biggest things is having periodical but scheduled times when you're going to be reporting. So if you know that every month on the first of the month you do it on the first of the month. You want to show trends, so like your growth and your engagement over time. So again, however that looks for you. You want to have benchmarks. So I like to have a sheet that looks at my quarters, my months, and my years. And that's so that I can look at things like how many likes did we have in 2016 versus how many do we have in 2017. And then that just kind of helps me chart over time a larger number like that. You also want to have some benchmarks against your competitors. So like I said, seeing where you've passed your competitors is really helpful, makes you look super awesome to those people you're reporting to. And then lastly, like I said, highlighting really specific and illustrative comments that really speak to like what you're doing and what your community looks like. Okay, now for some tips. Like I said, the first thing, do yourself a favor, schedule and regularly capture your data. It is not helpful if you've told yourself that you report on the first of the month and you don't do it until the 12th. The more you can just build things into your schedule and into your strategy, the easier it becomes for you. So if you know that you report every quarter, know ahead of time like what that date is, set some time aside, and then just do it. It makes your life so much easier. Next, make sure that you're creating reports with meaningful and comparative analysis. So like I've been saying all along, numbers are useless on their own without context. So make sure that you're making sense of your data and provide things that will help someone reading the report who isn't in it every day understand like what you're doing and how well you're doing. You're kind of the master of telling your own success story here, so make sure that people can see that what you're doing is working or that you understand what isn't working and you've got a plan to address that. Next, capture your visuals. So again, grabbing comments and posts and engagement rates. Those are the kinds of things that are going to help you back up your numbers and show people what's happening with context. Um, it also really helps because sometimes you can show someone like, these are the kinds of things that people say about us. This is the kind of engagement we have, and like, look how engaged our community is. Never present only numbers. Say what they actually mean to you and show what they actually mean to you. Um, Last is, to not forget about mobile and tablet experience, both on your website and on social media. So more than half of the world's web traffic right now is coming from mobile phones. So it's really important to make sure you're thinking about how your content looks on those screens. And I still see so many contests and newsletters and even websites that aren't optimized for mobile, and it looks so awful. You could have the best website in the world, and if I can't load it on my phone or on my tablet, I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time there. And so this is part of why in your Google Analytics you can actually see your bounce rate by device, which is really interesting. So if you have a terrible mobile experience, you're going to want to fix that. Being ready for all platforms really makes you look engaged, dedicated, ready, and professional. So make sure that you're looking at that space. It can really help you out and set you apart from your competitors. Lastly, the thing that I want to leave you all with, certainly at this part of the course, but just in this lecture, is that your campaigns and all of your community management fails if you think of it just as being on its own. So I'm hoping that in this lecture, I really drove this point home that you're not in a silo. All of these things work together. Your sales team works with your web team, works with you, works with your larger marketing team. If you are the community manager, you need to know like what you're doing for your email newsletters. You need to know what kind of events are being put on. You need to know like what's happening with your company in the public relations space. Like you need to know all of these things, and knowing all of these things and working together as a team just makes you a killer community manager, but it also makes your company or your brand or your organization really cohesive, and people like that. Okay, now I want to talk about the second part of your major assignment. So just going over some of the key things that I want you to be including and just to draw your attention to. So you've already done part one, and it is so important when you are doing this second part that you reference that and you incorporate any feedback that I've given you into this part of the project. It's worth 40 marks, so don't lose marks by not taking that feedback because I'm giving it to you for a reason. So there's a bunch of things that I'm asking you to do, and my goal with this assignment is for you to get a valuable tool that you can leave the course with and have a great plan. So I think it's great if you're already doing a company that you're working for or your own brand, because you're kind of just doing this work for yourself, which I think hopefully will be useful for you. So the first thing is you're going to be creating your persona profiles. So you're going to be taking that audience identification from part one and creating personas based on that. If you want, I recommend watching lecture 2 again, because that's really when we spent the most time on it. So going back to understanding what those personas are and really developing them. The next is I want you to select your platforms. So select where you're going to be posting. So again, thinking of like your target audience, your target platforms for each. And I need you to include a description of why you are using this platform. So a lot of you have not done this well in your first assignment. So just please make sure that you're giving a good reason why you're using Facebook versus Instagram or LinkedIn or Snapchat or whatever you're using. Just tell me why you're using it. It's not enough to just say, I'm going to use Twitter. Next, I want you to create an editorial calendar. So this is a big chunk of this project, and my hope with this is that it's something that you can either implement afterwards or that you can take away and use in the future as a guide for what these should look like. So you're going to be doing a 1 month calendar with written posts. So all of your social media posts using your brand voice that you came up with in part one. So if you're doing a couple of posts in a day, I want to see what type of content, the platform, sort of this like where, how, and when you're posting things. And you're actually writing those posts out. So, be thinking in that headspace. If you're writing a tweet, make sure it's 140 characters. Think about if you're doing a Facebook post, is there a link to it? Is there visuals? And if you do want to associate some multimedia pieces with it, so whether that's like photos or videos or trackable links, put those in there. If you can't find suitable images because they don't exist, then feel free to describe what you're going to be using as the visual. That'll be totally fine also. You also could integrate a monthly theme if you want. So if you're going to do the month of December, then like what are you doing for holiday posts? Are you doing holiday posts? All of those things, just try to consider what you would be doing. And really the goal is I want you to paint me a picture of what your brand is doing in a month. Lastly, a crisis management plan. So we're actually going to talk about this next week, but I just want you to be thinking like, what is your worst case scenario for your brand? Is it bad comments? Is it negative press? So we're going to have that response matrix to sort of think of how we respond to those kinds of problems. Okay, if you have any questions, please email me. And again, like I said, keep posting in the Facebook group. It's worth 10% of your mark, and I think it's a great way for all of us to learn from each other. Have a great week.